This is Diego Cortez. Welcome to The Scoop. And we had Brian Rast with us last time. Talked a lot about cash games, but he's had a lot of success in tournaments recently, and he's playing in the Epic Poker tournaments now. So we're going to roll more with him. And if you missed part one, it's on Card Player TV. I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned the Epic Poker Tour, which we'll see if it's a success or not, and hopefully it will be. But it's unique in the sense that the qualification standards really are high.
Yeah, they're
so
very high.
Was it a case where almost every table that you had was a tough table or a serious table?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much the case that every table I was at was tough by the standards of, just about any other type of tournament. I mean, like if it was a World Series of Poker tournament, it'd be pretty ridiculous.
Right.
If it was a World Poker Tour tournament, like sometimes you'll get tables that tough, but many times you won't, especially early in the tournament. I would say in the Epic, there was maybe on day one, there was like one of the 6-handed tables that had like 3 people that qualified through the Pro-Am.
Oh,
and
right.
I remember seeing, wow, that's like maybe like the only like kind of good table in the tournament. I mean, basically the difference in the Epic is, I think there are some like good professionals that are there that, in my opinion, like don't really make. They know how to play, they know how to read hands, but they might not really make things difficult for me.
Right. Just in terms of their style, not being as aggressive.
There's their style, and then there's probably other pros that are like a little tougher. I mean, it's maybe, in my opinion, the difference between like some of the good players and like some of the great players.
Well,
so because I think in order to be a great player, you basically have to be able to make things difficult. I just don't think you see any like you never hear anyone saying, wow, that guy's a great player, he's just so solid. I mean, you hear like, wow, Phil Ivey's a great player because he makes it really tough. Like, he seems like he's bluffing all the time, but then he has it when he gets called. Like, stuff like Tom Dwan. Like, these aren't guys that you're like, wow, they're so solid. They're guys that sometimes you're like, they're spew monkeys, but, Well,
I was going to say, I agree with that, but there are players who make things tough on you, even though they're not great players. In other words, they're going to self-destruct, but they may take you down with them. They're going to be difficult because they are going to be putting you to tough
that's
tough
definitely
situations.
True. And then in which case, they're not great because maybe they're a little too spewy. Like, I'm not saying that you need to be crazy in order to be great. In fact, there are some players that are great that are definitely tighter than like Tom and Phil, because they're definitely on the looser side of, I'd say, like the great player spectrum. I mean, like take like Phil Galfond. Now, he's definitely plays tighter than those two guys, and I think most people would say he's extremely tough and a great player. So it's kind of both ends, but
and you have players who you may not want to back them, but if they come to your table, they're going to interfere with what you're trying to do just because they're so active and reckless, even.
No, yeah, that's definitely true, and I would prefer to have, if like let's say there was a player that had like 2 guys like that had the same EV, like one on the tighter side, one less, and maybe not a great player, but just like a good or decent player. I'd probably, it depends on where I am. In position, I'd probably prefer the monkey. Out of position, I wouldn't.
Right.
So,
One interesting dynamic that I was thinking of is the fact that you also probably have played with a lot of the players in the tournament. In a typical tournament at your table, you're going to have players you've never seen before, or maybe seen before, but don't really have much experience with. And so much of that factors in, where in this sort of tournament, maybe you have some history with almost everyone at the table, which factors into how you play the hands, and that's a really interesting dynamic compared to the typical tournament, where if you've never played with someone before, you need to start out trying to gather information and not making some super aggressive read on them.
Yeah, it's kind of a mix, because I would say that it's definitely not the case that I went in and like I just played with everyone every time. But it is kind of a weird thing, because you're now getting to a pretty small group of people that even if you haven't played with or don't know like player B that well, you probably have a friend who does.
Right.
So like there were definitely a couple times in the tournament I'd be like, hey, like reads on so-and-so, and like get a response. Like, maybe a good or just a half-half response, but it was definitely easier to do that, because you're now talking about a small group that, it's almost like you know that. God, what's that game? Like 6 degrees of separation from
Right.
Kevin Bacon.
Right.
It's like 1 degree of separation now, really.
At most.
So, yeah, that definitely even happened like once. Like, there was a pot early on day one against Chris Moorman that I played. That was like a really kind of strange pot. One of the strangest of the tournament that I played.
Did you have a lot of history with him? Or?
And I had like almost no history from him. Like, definitely in the past 2 or 3 years since, I think like maybe his tournament wins have been more recent, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what happened is he was one of the people I'm like, hey, like reads on Chris Moorman, and I got like back a couple reads that say like he's pretty aggressive. He's definitely willing to re-raise with nothing and just make plays to win the pot if he thinks he can do it.
Right.
I think the person was talking about pre-flop.
He's more a stereotypical internet guy who's 4-betting light or even 5-betting light sometimes.
Yes, which is kind of what I had heard. So basically this pot came up where I'd actually already 3-bet him twice before I got this read, and one time he folded when he opened the button. I 3-bet the small blind. Another time I 3-bet him in position when he opened under the gun, 6 max, and flop came ace queen queen and went check check. Turn came a blank. I think there was a flush draw either on the flop or by the turn for sure. He bet, I called. River was a jack. He bet, I raised. He tank folded. So there had already been 2 hands now where I had been like kind of playing aggressive 3-betting. He didn't see either of the hands.
And he's left with a doubt in his
So
mind.
he doesn't know, but he's left with a doubt that I'm kind of making plays at him or whatever. So it gets folded to him on the hand in question, and he opens the small blind. I think it was 200, 400, I think. He opened at 1,200, and I called. And the flop was 10-4 deuce. So he bets like 1,300 or 1,200. I have ace 10.
Okay.
So my decision at this point, because he had like 50K, he didn't have more than 50K. He had somewhere between 40 and 50K. So he had like 100 big blinds.
Yeah.
I made a decision based on the fact that I thought that we had been playing some pots that didn't get to showdown, and like he probably, if he had something, wasn't going to be eager to fold it,
right,
or maybe even make a play back at me. And then based on this read that I got, I was like, you know what, I'm just going to play this as goofy as possible, and I'm just going to get it in with him. And if he has ace 10 beat on this board, like God bless him,
right,
maybe I'll have 5 outs, because he has like 4 deuce or
if he has a set, then so be it.
Yeah, if he has a set, I'll just go bust on this. I mean, I had like 60 or 70K, so I would have had like 30 left or 20 left or something like that. So anyway, so he bets 1,200. I make it 3,300. He makes it like 8,300. I make it like the 13,300. He makes it like 19,200.
So very incremental.
Yes, we're almost like clicking it back. I mean, a couple I think the first time the 3-bet was a little bigger, but then we clicked it back, and then I made it like 24, 25, 200, whatever 6K more was, and then he folded. So it was just like a really goofy pot where that raise there was like a 6-bet. My 6-bet on the flop, and then
small raise.
While he was thinking about the 6-bet, I could hear like Scott Clements or someone on the other side of the table, which was definitely, if I could hear them, Chris could, because Chris was actually to my right. I was in like the 5 seat, he was in the 4 seat, and they were in like the 2 and 3. They say like, oh man, he's got a set, which is like a little out of line, but I mean, I guess it does look like that. So I decided to show that I had ace 10, which I almost never would do, just to be like,
he said
I
that
don't have a set. I don't have
the hand was
I just
over?
am playing a 10 for value.
Right.
Like I'm a sicko. So, so that was just a hand where kind of things got a little out of control.
Was there any reaction from Chris Moorman when you showed the ace 10 that you saw?
Not really.
He didn't give away any reaction there?
No, not really. I mean,
presumably he's beat, but he still may be surprised that you weren't stronger.
Like, the hand didn't get talked about. I didn't, and I also didn't say anything. I just showed my hand.
So if you didn't have the information from him, clearly you would have played it differently.
If I didn't have the read, I'm not sure how I would have played it. I like raising the flop, and I'm not sure what would have happened when he 3-bet me.
But as you said before, you
But
probably
Doty
wouldn't be
made it
necessarily ready to go for all your chips if you had no information on him. If he was a stranger.
I don't like to fold, and it's hard to have that hand beat there. I don't know what I would do. The problem is once I call his 3-bet on the flop of 8,300, unless I'm planning on deciding on future streets, like call, turn, decide, river, I'm pretty much agreeing to stacks if I don't fold. Because, I mean, 8,300 call, there's like almost 20K in the middle.
And
He has like
less than 40 more.
Less than 40K. I mean, he doesn't have to even bet pot. He can bet like half pot and almost get his whole stack in. Half pot turn for 10K. Sorry, excuse me.
That's wrong. We've set it up.
And then half pot river for 20K, and I mean he's almost all in. So it is kind of a weird spot on the flop where I might still make this play readless. I've definitely done it before, but like when I got that read, I just knew on the flop, even with my first raise, that this was what I was going to do.
Right.
Which I might not have known normally, even if I had raised the flop. So.
Well, the next level of that is that you've got to assume that other people have information about you, and that's got to affect how you play as well, which is a lot different from a World Series tournament where, even though you're a known player in certain circles, people at the table may not know much about you, or even if they know who you are, they don't know your tendencies or your...
Something I've always been interested in a little bit, because I don't actually know exactly what people think about me as a player. I mean, I just posted another hand from this Epic Poker Tournament on 2+2, and in one of the comments somebody made, they basically said that his read on me is probably that, like, he might have the read that I don't like to fold, which is, I think, true, but I'm not sure how many people
Nobody
have that
likes
read.
to fold.
Yeah. Yeah, there's some people that say they don't like to fold, and there's people that actually don't like to fold.
I mean, there are two categories: don't like to fold and never fold.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, I just don't know. I think that sometimes I play pretty differently too. I mean, I think there's times when I play like relatively solid with like mixing it up here and there, and there's other times where I've definitely found myself playing kind of like a maniac. I mean, in this Epic Poker Tournament, I think I kind of started going bananas like midway through day 2 and playing like a maniac, and some of the hands worked out for me and some of them didn't. And I think some of it too is I was just pretty tired, and I'm not 100% happy with how I played. I think I played great for the first like 3 or 4 levels of day 2, but then I think I started to deteriorate. My table got tougher and I was tired, and I think I was playing too aggressively in a lot of spots. I think Seidel got moved to my right. He took advantage of it a couple times. I mean, he made some big hands in blind versus blind spots, but I think because I was being a little too aggressive, I probably lost more than I needed to in a couple hands. So
I'm curious about one thing, which is talking about tournaments that have very tough fields, which is rare. You know, a smaller field but tough field. Certainly, most people think the 50K Players Championship would fit that definition.
Yeah.
People have different opinions in the sense that, yes, all the players are experienced, successful professionals, almost all the players, but because it's mixed games, not everyone really is expert at all the games.
Oh, yeah,
Probably
for
nobody
sure.
is. And some players, especially people who are mostly focused on no limit and pot limit, are relatively inexperienced in some of the limit games, the rotation games. So when you played that tournament, did it surprise you as to what the level of play was, or was it in line with your expectation? How did it compare to this Epic tournament?
I wouldn't say I was surprised. I would say that I had a pretty good idea about what to expect, that I'd say the majority of players were very competent in the mixed games. I mean, I think you're more likely to get a sign up from someone. You know, it is a 50K tournament, so you basically, let's say you're talking about like the highest level of successful players. You know, then maybe you'll get guys who both are mixed game players or no limit pot limit guys who come play this tournament because, you know, if you have millions of dollars, you're gonna gamble on the 50K. Maybe you swap
Right.
or sell some, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, if you're talking about kind of maybe the level below that, like guys who are bankrolls less than $1 million, and like this tournament's very aggressive for them,
Mm-hmm.
so they're definitely selling or working out some deal to get in. I think you're more likely to find guys in that range who are like mixed game horse
Sure.
players than like a guy who's, you know, like a 25-50 pretty successful no
Right.
limit PLO player is not going to go play that tournament.
No question about it. I mean, as
So
far as the
what that
composition.
does mean is it does skew the field a little bit towards that range of player. So I definitely found that to be the case, and because of that, and because people are a lot more likely to have some experience in no limit hold'em, like mostly through playing 10Ks or
Mm-hmm.
whatever, you know, the weakest game by far was PLO, and that was the game that throughout the tournament I found that most, I'd say more than half of the field was actively trying to avoid playing
Mm-hmm.
large PLO pots.
Did you go in with a strategy that you would really try to, push more marginal edges in the no limit and the pot limit parts of the tournament, or that you'd look to exploit people in those games specifically being your stronger games, or you just went in knowing, well, that's only 2 games in the mix, so I'll just take it as it
I
comes.
don't really go in with like a set strategy. I kind of just try to stay observant and make my strategy on the fly. And I'd say that the strategy that you're saying is kind of like what developed. I think what ended up happening for No Limit is I kind of decided that I would I didn't really go out of my way to push edges in No Limit. I just tried to play and like take advantage of what's going on. If maybe people were folding, I'd open some more pots. I wouldn't say I like 3-bet a ton in that tournament, really. Like I 3-bet some, but probably not more than what someone would expect from like a aggressive player. I'd say in pot limit, after I kind of noticed this tendency,
Right.
I started really going kind of bananas in the pot limit.
In terms of volume of hands.
Yes, just because, I mean, basically, if I could justify playing the hand, I played it.
Mm-hmm.
And
Even if someone had opened the pot. I mean,
yeah,
I would
but by
presume
the
they
way,
would
a
be
lot of
opening
people
lot,
were
but-
coming for limps. It's just like people really did not want to play big PLO plots, and that is one of my, it's one of my most experienced games. I don't really know which game I'm better at. I mean, sometimes I think I'm better at No Limit, and sometimes I think it's close. I don't know. Occasionally I think I'm better at PLO. I don't know.
But in this field, you had more of an edge.
But in this
PLO,
field, it
presumably.
definitely felt like there was more edge in PLO, and I know that pretty much the whole like high stakes cash game world knows like I'm a high stakes cash game PLO player, and like people just didn't really want to play big pots with me in PLO. So I mean, but there's 2 types of players. There's also the no limit PLO guys and who don't have that attitude. So like if I had one of those guys 2 to my left or something, I know that like I'm not just gonna open some hand and he's gonna like if he's gonna fold like a decent playable hand in position. So I was being smart about it. I'd go bananas if like I could.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know that some guy, like I'm trying to give a good example, but some guy like David Oppenheim,
Mm-hmm.
Who's one of the best mixed game players and even plays No Limit some, he's probably like PLO's the cheapest round to fold. There's no antes and it's got the small blinds. So like why should he bother getting out of the line in PLO when he's got an edge in all the other games?
Right. It's not going to cost you much to really sit that out.
Yeah, so I mean, like he's just, if I open, even if he knows I'm playing a lot of hands and my hand's weak, he's probably going to fold like most of his mid-range or weaker, mid-range type hands that like I would play in his spot, but he like doesn't want to because PLO's a game, the pots can get really big. He's going to have to make tough decisions, and like, he's probably not going to do that against someone who he knows is like a PLO expert.
Were you able to accumulate enough chips in those sections, or was it also a matter of, well, you ran well in all the rounds and you're confident in the other games?
It depended. I mean, like day 1, actually, I like lost in the big bet games and won in the mixed games. It was different on different days. When I think day 3 was when I really ran up my chips, I believe. Now on that day, I won a bunch in like the no limit round. I had a cooler hand versus Mizzy where Sorrel was blind versus blind, and I had aces and he had queens, so we got all in pre-flop in the no limit hold'em. Can't really. And there was there's this other guy, I forget, but he was a mixed game player who I tortured on 2 different no limit hands and busted. And so I mean, I'd say like later in the tournament, I probably won more of my chips in the big bet games, like than comparatively. But early in the tournament, it was kind of up for grabs as to which game. I think I had a little bit of something going for me in terms of, I think I was probably underestimated in the mixed games.
Right.
Sometimes you'll play no limit and you'll think some guy's bad, and then maybe like 2 hours later you'll see some hands and you realize, well, I mean, I'm not saying this guy's great, but he does know what's going on.
Right. You weren't giving him quite as much credit as.
And I think that there was one hand in particular I played against Abe Masseri where I got like max value on a hand by playing it kind of goofy.
Right.
Like he opened the button and I had ace deuce 6 like jack.
This is in what game?
In Omaha 8 or better, something like that. Like ace deuce 6, and then I think my one other card, I don't remember what it was. I think it was suited, one suit, not double suited, and he opened and I just called, which I think most people would 3-bet there, but it's close. And like I thought that by just calling, he's never gonna give me ace deuce basically. So. Because I had been playing the 08 relatively aggressive. I probably in the couple rounds had been on the more aggressive for the limit games for how I played it. It's actually the one I feel the most comfortable in probably. So the flop came 6-6-3 with a flush draw, and I checked and he bet. And basically, I figured he would expect me to raise any 6.
Sure.
And now I don't only have a 6, I have a 6 and a nut low draw. So I kind of wanted to give him rope to keep firing. So I called, and the turn was an ace, and I check raised him, and he called, and then called a river bet. And like, I think another low card hit the river, like a 4 or a 5 or a 7 or an 8, and it didn't make any 1-card straights or anything. And then my live 2 was good, and the full house was good. And I think he just basically called me with no low and like ace king.
Right.
So.
Which you might not have done against someone else.
Or like a worse live low and ace king. And like I think he was like kind of talking to himself after the hand, which I don't see Abe do very much for a while. And I like basically, my opinion is that he just kind of underestimated. And there were a couple other spots like in deuce where one time I like check raised 3rd Street after making like an 8-6, and I like I got paid off. I don't think the person thought like I like had it in me to like check raise without a 7, and that's like a spot where I don't have a 7 very often. So I played some of the games, and I think there were times when I got underestimated in them.
They may just perceive that you're going to play them in a more straightforward manner than you are. And just a little bit of trickiness goes a long way in getting.
I think so too. And I mean, I think that's one of the things that, like, basically, you know how we were just talking about, like, the good no limit players from the Epic tournament who are definitely like winning poker players, and maybe they're not the toughest in the world. I think they're guys that play solid. They play tight. Every once in a while, they mix it up. Like maybe every once in a while, they'll 3-bet light. Like even if they know you're opening a lot, they won't 3-bet, and then they'll 3-bet you, and then. If you have like ace-8 offsuit, and let's say I'm in that spot and I get 3-bet, I'm like, well, I mean, I have been opening a lot. He might be 3-betting me light, but he's playing tight enough that I kind of just have to let go of the ace-8 offsuit here, and that's probably not worth 4-betting. So it's kind of like that, and that's how you win in those spots, and that's kind of like how I was playing the mixed games in this tournament. I was playing pretty solid. I wasn't getting out of line, and so. A little bit of trickiness that I knew to do mixed in with that, like, goes a long way.
Yeah.
So
ultimately, you made the final table, which was straight no limit, and
which was, I think, pretty huge for me.
Yeah, I would assume that. So part of the value in the tournament itself was that if you could make the final table, it's going to be your game. You're going to have an edge on maybe the whole table or most of the table.
Yeah.
And in terms of justifying playing in the tournament, that's a big consideration.
Yeah. No, I definitely thought so. And I think it.
Did it work out that way? I mean,
yeah, I thought the two
results aside.
The two players that I thought were the toughest going into the final table at the no limit would have been first Scott Seaver and then probably Ben Lamb.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, Ben was the shortest stack and went out fast, and Scott never really got anything going.
Right.
And I mean, after that, probably Phil. I mean, I thought Phil played pretty well. He had some good hands. I just actually watched the coverage. He had a really good bluff with like King 10 versus Oasis on one hand. He bet like 25% on the river and got Oasis to fold like what was top pair on the flop, and it was a pretty good hand. I remember it was one of those like, what does Phil have? And like I got it wrong. He had like the one hand that like kind of doesn't really make any sense. Just it was King 10 on like the 8 high board. So Phil plays goofy and tricky, but he knows what he's doing, and I definitely especially think that his style works really well against basically everyone except I'd say the really toughest players, because I think he does a few things that can be a little exploitable, like kind of give away his hand. Like basically he tries to play really exploitable poker. Like he tries to exploit what everyone's doing.
Right.
I've talked about this a lot in videos and other places, but there's exploitable poker and balancing poker. Balancing's where you do your best to like balance your range and disguise your hands so other people can't read you.
And they can't exploit you.
But the problem with that is that you're not exploiting your opponents. Like Phil tries to exploit his opponents. Now the problem is that can give away what you have oftentimes, and so I think Phil is a lot more likely to define his ranges by like his limping, over raising hands pre-flop, whatever. How he does those kind of things.
But in the meantime, he's accumulated chips from.
But
plays like that.
Yeah. So and this was a spot final table where I think luckily for him there weren't a lot of great no limit hold'em players. I mean, I'd probably say like Scott Seaver and me and maybe Ben.
Right.
So, but other than them, there weren't a lot of guys that were like really ton of experience playing no limit and really going to be able to pick on that. And two of those guys went out.
Right.
And and like he does a lot of goofy things, does a lot of things right, and like a lot of that, even he's pretty good at trapping too. Like he got me pretty good on one hand where he had flop top set of kings and got me to 3-barrel him. So he can be pretty tough. But then outside of him, like we're talking about, like I don't know, I really don't like the way Min played a lot of hands at the final table. Like I felt maybe more than anyone this might have been like the worst for him because he's a very good mixed game player.
Right. I mean, the nature of the tournament is that a lot of the final table is going to be composed of mixed game players because that's the majority of the tournament getting there. But once you get there, if you manage to get there and you're a no limit player, I mean, Min Lee spends his day playing mixes that may not have any big bet games.
Yeah, and I know it was bad for Matt Glantz, although I know Matt's been working on his no limit game and like he made a pretty deep run, for example, in this Epic tournament. So I think his no limit game has gotten a lot better. But I mean, still, this was bad for him because I think net he was one of the best mixed game players at the table. Whereas
if you play the format all the way through, he's a strong favorite.
Yeah, in that. I think he's strong in that field. So, it definitely changed the ball game for the final table for sure.
Thanks for joining us on The Scoop. It's been really interesting talking to Brian Rast. We talked about cash games and tournaments, but we're really going to get in depth about the 50K Players Championship, the fact that he won 2 bracelets this summer, his long drawn out heads up battle with Phil Hellmuth. All that is going to be on the next episode.